I got Mary Holland. Where's Mary Holland? Right there. Okay, she's on her way. Have a seat. And Sarah Thompson. Yeah. Sarah Thompson, our favorite homeopath. Yeah. What a strange world. I 5 years ago, I never imagined I'd be hosting a meeting and featuring a homeopath on stage, and I would be interviewing her. As my daughter likes to say, yeah, Dad, that's so random.
The first time he put me on the stage, when he tells a story and he introduces me, he says, well, that was a situation where I put anyone on the stage.
All right, we've got, let's see how much time we have here. We're going to end at 3:45 for a break. So, we'll add a few minutes here. So 3:50. So we've got a little bit of time. Mary, tell us now. If people don't know your story, I don't know if now's the time to tell your story. But you were very much an outsider for many years. When was CHT founded? It was.
CHT was founded in about 2016 on the basis of World Mercury Project, but the movement goes way back. The
movement
vaccines.
goes way back. But you were way ahead of things, and then you lived through all the dark times, 2020 until recently. Now you find yourself with as a close observer of everything that's unfolding right now. Maybe you want to give us the highlights of what you think have been the major points of progress that we've made, say, in the last, since say February.
Sure, since February. Okay, so I'm from Children's Health Defense, and so obviously getting Bobby Kennedy as Secretary of HHS is huge. Absolutely huge. For the first time ever, we have a friend on the inside, and he's brought Jay, and he's brought Marty, and he's brought Mehmet Oz, and a lot of other people. And as you say, they're a small band against, tens of thousands of a bureaucracy and a culture that is deadly, literally. But that's making a huge difference. There's some other things that are pretty important. There was, when it comes to the childhood schedule, I think they're drawing attention to the hazards, which is wonderful. There was just in June of 2025 a very important decision by the U.S. Supreme Court, Mahmoud versus Taylor, that basically says reaffirm that parents have control over their children's religious upbringing and education. That's huge. And it requires the court to apply strict scrutiny. In other words, the government has to use the least restrictive means possible. And this case was about pulling kids out of LGBT-friendly, woke stuff in schools. But saying that the government has to use the least restrictive means possible is a big deal. There's a case coming out of the Second Circuit, Miller versus McDonald, that was brought by Aaron Seary representing ICANN. The case was dismissed as being constitutionally no violation, no problem to be seen here, forcing Amish schools to have immunization according to the CDC schedule, according to the New York schedule. This is now going to the Supreme Court after that, with 22 states signing on through their attorney generals. This is huge. This is really huge. It means that I don't think the Supreme Court cannot take that case. I don't think they can dodge that. And by forcing them now to apply strict scrutiny, obviously 45 states now have religious exemptions and they have public health. So, I think I don't want to go to say it's a foregone conclusion, but the likelihood that we're going to see religious exemptions in all 50 states is really great. And that's pretty huge. Also, I want to mention something that our council just achieved. There's been a fight, as you know, everywhere that doctors have been intimidated not to give medical exemptions. As Brett was saying, somebody has an allergy to PEG, they've had anaphylaxis. No, you have to take a COVID shot. That's universal for kids, and basically every state, because the doctors have been intimidated. So there was just a decision from the Second Circuit Court of Appeals and now being applied in federal district district courts, whatever your doctor, your licensed physician says is a reason for you not to take a required vaccine in the states that still require them, that's good enough. That's a big deal. So a girl that had 7 doctors' medical exemptions in New York on Long Island was being denied by her school district the ability to go to school. This child was now 16 in high school. She was suicidal because she couldn't get to school. 7 doctor's letters. And thank God, a federal district judge did the common sense thing and said, no, maybe the doctor's letters should carry the day here. So anyway, medical exemptions, religious exemptions, changes within HHS, the strength of the movement. Thank you, Jeffrey, for Brownstone and all the other groups that are represented here. It's making a difference. They are there because of us. They would not be there but for changes in the election in 2022 and the strength of this movement. So
yeah, that's right. It's the cultural groundswell, right? But even after all this, the CHD is still treated as, every day in the mainstream press as being some sort of rogue organization.
Yeah, but Jeffrey, that's par for the course. They're now quoting us. I'm talking to mainstream newspapers almost every day, which is remarkable. So I don't care if they, so long as they get our name right and they send people to our website, children'shealthdefense.org, I'm okay with that.
Yeah. Sarah?
Yeah. And I've been thinking about this I keep having to pinch myself. I mean, in 5 years ago, if you had told me that, and certainly 15 years ago, if you had told me that all of these institutions that I have thought were monstrous my whole life would be just under this kind, even to be having these conversations in the public square, to watch the public schools just destroying themselves, complete own goals all over the place, to see these conversations happening about vaccines. It has been so fast what has happened in the past couple of months. And it's amazing to watch the good guys play the long game. And it's taken some patience for people to understand that, coming from way outside and just hating it and wanting to burn it down, to all of a sudden having people inside and to watch them play the long game. It really has made me think about, stepping into what I do. And I'm a homeopath, and now I have to get in an argument with Brett. That to realize that we are actually in a situation where, at the highest levels of visibility, people are starting to have some validation for that. The thing Father Nagel was talking about, this internal, intuitive, human understanding of your relationship. This farm is a testament to what it means to align your remedial intention with the vital force of the organism, in this case, the ecosystem of a farm, in order to bring about cure, which in homeopathy, the definition of cure is that the vital force may rule with unbounded sway, so that we, in our reason-gifted mind, are free to pursue the highest purpose of our existence. That is what this land is doing. And so now we have this opportunity, and it's an important opportunity, to offer the alternative, not just the alternative remedial agent, but an alternative paradigm for people as they watch this. Pharma is the most effective sales funnel in the history of humankind. Mm-hmm. Starting from before birth, you are indoctrinated with this idea that you are fallen, and your fallenness is this inherent disease state, but you have a chance at an approach to redemption in this life by going to the priest of pharma and receiving those sacraments. And so we're so built into this idea that even when we start to try to move away from it, it's really hard to get outside of that kind of thinking about what we want when we look for things that heal us. And so now we have this moment where the window is opening and people are saying, okay, I knew that felt bad, but it's actually so bad I can't look away. And we have the opportunity to step in and say, and we don't have to think about this. Most of this goes away if we start thinking about our health differently in the first place, which is an amazing place to be.
I should mention this quick story. I don't know if should we be concerned about those brown beasts that seem to be gathering? What is that?
They look peaceful, Jeffrey.
Oh, okay. Okay.
They're just interesting.
All right. No, I just want to... No, Sarah, it turns out to be the most well-read expert on the works of Harris Coulter who's ever existed. And this is I got to tell the story very quickly because I find it so fascinating. I got curious about the origins of AMA, and then I remembered about 35 years ago I wrote a paper on this, and I found it incredibly. And I traced through the footnotes and I found this name Harris Coulter. I thought, well, that's very interesting. I'll look him up. And I found out he had written a number of books, including a history of medicine from the ancient world to the present. I thought, this is remarkable. I'll buy some. I found only used copies for $1,000 each. I thought, well, this is strange. Who published it? I looked up the publisher. I wrote the publisher. And I said, hey, it's strange. You don't seem to have these books by Harris Coulter in print. And within, I don't know, like less than a minute, they wrote back and said, we will never bring his books back in print again. He's basically he said he's dead to us. And anybody who wants these books is dead to us also. You know what I mean? It was like that. It was that extreme. And I thought, that is wild. So being aware of copyright law, I realized, okay, if you're not going to keep something in print, it defaults back to the family. It's owned by the family. Now, it took a few months, and we found his son. And it turns out he raised some very wonderful children, and they love his father. They didn't know what to do about bringing his books back in print. Didn't know anybody even cared anymore. And I said, well, here's what you do. You give them to Brownstone. We're not going to make any money off them. Just put them in the Commons. We only publish in the Creative Commons, right? So we don't use copyright, subject for another day. But we don't own any of our intellectual content exclusively. So we're free to reprint, for-profit reprint anywhere in the world. I just don't believe in that old stupid system. So we put them in print, and then out of nowhere, Sarah Thompson arrives, and she was so excited, and she had these. She bought the books, and you already had the books, I guess. Yeah,
the ones I could get, but I didn't have all of them.
Yeah, so we were able to get you, and you would call me up. Hey, it's volume 3 coming in. It's coming. Give us a little time.
I got a lot of sticky notes.
Because I tell you what, publishing those books was a problem. I mean, it was an expensive undertaking and a problem, but it was made easier by the fact the family cooperated. They were thrilled. And by the way, I didn't want to call the family because I have a long experience in publishing. When you call the children of if they have father or grandfather and they own the literary rights, usually it's two things are true. One is that they don't care because it's not in print. Like, that was not true in this case. The other thing they usually do is they say, oh, really? So, how much you willing to pay for these? And you say, oh, $100. Well, I'll get back to you on that. And eventually the price is, I don't know, several $1 million or something like that. I mean, I've seen it's happened to me again and again and again. So I usually don't even call the families because they have no idea about how publishing works, and they start gold digging just immediately when they find out they own literary rights that they may not have even cared about at all in the past. In this case, they gave them to us for free, not even an issue. So we had that clear, and we're a poor organization, but we put a lot of resources into making these things available. So now all 5 volumes are in print, and now Tony, I think, is publishing Tony over at Skyhorse is publishing some of the, and maybe you're going to work on. We're going to get all of Harris Coulter back in print. But anyway, here's the thing I wanted to say. What's that? Harris Coulter. Yeah, we've got his books over there. They're unbelievable. Unbelievable. What a researcher. What a genius. But here's the point I want to make. So Sarah turns out to be this world expert in the history of medicine. There she is, sitting right there. Okay. But that was not me. I didn't know anything about the subject, really. I mean, I wrote a paper on it decades ago, but it was just a one paper, and who cares? She's a genuine expert. This seems to be what's happening right now, that the actual experts are exposing the fake experts. You see this? This is what's interesting. I'm fascinated with this whole question of how does society change? How do you move from one paradigm to another? How do you dismantle a system of oppression, especially one based in science? Well, you do better science than the fake science. That's how you do it. I mean, that was the essence of the Great Barrington Declaration. And we saw an example of this the other day in the Senate.
Oh my God, I was there.
With the humiliation of a person who claims to be named Jake Scott. We don't know if he's actually, maybe it was a hologram. I don't know. But he was the best that pharma could throw at Ron Johnson's hearing, I guess. They had workshopped all of his papers and all of his tweets up to that point. He showed up at the Senate and halfway through just choked and went silent because he couldn't answer any more questions. He had no answers. It was a humiliation like I have never seen. I mean, it's the most devastating moment for pharma in 100 years. This actually happened just last week. And it's a paradigm for us. We know more about the topic than our enemies. That's absolutely essential. That requires discipline, study, precision, knowledge, and these two represent that. That's been the job of Brownstone, to find people like this, give them a platform, and through this method, we are accomplishing astonishing things. I mean, it's amazing to me to see what happens, because all they have is their authority and their fake science and their, the old science, blind me with your science, That's what they've got. But if you can outsmart them and get better at their game than they are, then we can, I think, ultimately win, right?
Jeffrey, can I speak to that? Because
yeah.
I was in that hearing room. I think there were a couple other people that were there. And so this doctor, this MD, is associated. He's on the faculty at Stanford Medical School, right? And
is he really on the faculty? I think he's like honorary faculty.
Well, okay, whatever. But he is, he was put up by pharma, and he was on Twitter, and he's apparently saying, I have pulled together a database of 661 studies that prove that there have been excellent clinical trials with inert placebos that show, that discredit Bobby Kennedy. The purpose of this was to discredit Secretary Kennedy, who said there's never been a legitimate inert placebo controlled for anything on the childhood schedule. So this goes in this guy's written submission, and Aaron Seary, attorney for ICANN, takes it apart in writing, but also there at this testimonial table together with Brownstone fellow Toby Rogers. Yeah. And Aaron's, yes, it was great. And so Aaron goes through the studies, and he says, 500 of them don't relate to the childhood schedule. The ones that 94 of them relate to kids with, nothing that's on the childhood schedule. And he basically gets down to 3 that legitimately might show that there had been an inert placebo, and explains exactly how each one of them is not an inert placebo. One was neomycin. It was an antibiotic. The other was, they had people who'd already had 3 doses of the prior vaccine, and I forgot what the third one. Then the guy, what was humiliating, and nobody was trying to humiliate him. Honest to God, they were not intending to. They weren't.
That's right.
He acknowledges, I've never read the 661 studies. He acknowledges he had never read them. And we were the audience, we were just dumbfounded. And what I said to Defender, our daily president, every person in that audience knew more than that doctor. And it was stunning. It was really stunning.
Yep. That point is a fascinating one. That point about the experts being in the audience, right? This happened to me at, I attended the Supreme Court hearing for Murphy, Missouri, right? This is about free speech. And I tell you, it was a weird and actually mortifying experience to be on the sidewalk.
Yeah.
You were there, right? Because all of us rabble, we the hoi polloi, are gathered on the sidewalks outside. But there's marble steps leading up to these pillars, and the fancy people are inside. And they're having very important arguments. Except that it turned out they didn't know a damn thing. I mean, the justices were asking the most idiotic questions. They didn't know anything about the case. They didn't know anything about the case history. They didn't know anything about the empirical reality of on the ground of what. And we were sitting on the sidewalk, just astounded. How did these people become Supreme Court justices if they don't know anything? Not just about this case, but about the actual First Amendment. I mean, it was, but it became for me that moment became like paradigmatic of our times. The experts are on the sidewalk, the real experts, and the fake experts are on the inside with the power.
The emperor has no clothes.
Yeah.
Oh, there.
Well, and I think that brings us to this question of the fact that people do turn to the experts and they are looking for real expertise, and not everybody actually wants to figure this stuff out. Most people are not watching these hearings. Most people are not doing this research. And I think that, and I've said this to a number of people in the past day that I've been here, that a lot of the resistance, I think, that is kind of gut level resistance to what's what Bobby's doing and why they're just buying this nonsense that's blatantly false coming out of the media, is because people are feeling very, very fearful. They've been completely indoctrinated into the idea that this system existed for their health, and if those experts are naked, if they don't exist, these people, they're feeling. They feel in danger, and that's why they use this bizarre language about it. And this is where I think it becomes important. Charlie Kirk wanted us to talk to people across, and this is now we have found each other. And we have found the people who are willing to learn this and develop our own expertise. But now to help people understand that they can still get what they need, even if these institutions collapse, is something that I think becomes a really important conversation, because we've now got the Overton window is like cracked and smashed and all over the lawn. And so all of a sudden now it's like, I got to talk to my boomer aunt about what's going to happen if my kids get chickenpox and how we're all going to be okay. And that's a different level of well, they're 19 and 15.
Well, you take them on a vacation to Florida is what you do.
Yeah, I actually did finally manage to get them chickenpox when they were little, but their fears were legitimate. You're not vaccinating your children. What's going to happen? And then they were thinking, well, I was just doing nothing. And I was saying, no, you can't think your kids are just not going to get sick. The point is, you want to meet the manifestation of the disease state in a way that allows the vital force to grow stronger in itself, not to suppress it. That kind of language isn't yet ready to go across. And so finding ways to meet in this middle ground is what I feel like is going to become very pertinent. Because I get up here and start explaining homeopathy to y'all. We're going to lose the interest real fast.
No, I don't think we would.
I don't know.
We all love homeopathy.
Tell me.
Go ahead.
I was just going to say that I think that you're right, that when people lose faith in the experts, they have to ask themselves, well, who else is lying to me? Right. What else is false? And then that's pretty terrifying, right? If you think that everything that you believed in and that you literally put your life on the line for is wrong, it's somewhat terrifying. Most people don't really want to have to question everything, and you can't blame them.
No, and we do outsource some degree of research and synthesis. I mean, I feel like I have to preface everything I ever say with, I probably didn't think this up myself. Because everything is just always coming in from somebody. There's that old self-help idea of putting yourself always in the presence of 5 people, the average of whom will make you better. And one of the things that I immediately experienced when I started to become a part of the Brownstone world was that any factor of 5 made me better. And so that's kind of our job, is to be out there just meeting people where they're at and making it okay to not know everything about everything, but have there be trustworthy people who know something about everything.
You know, one of the tactics that's used to shut us down is to shout slogans and caricature our views, right? But they thought with Bobby early on that was going to work. You remember? They said, "Oh well, he's an anti-vaxxer, right? You can't have an." But the more they said that, the more they wore that phrase out, that word out, and then it stopped meaning anything at some point.
Yeah, I mean, 17 years worth, right? Conspiracy theorists, anti-vaxxer, all intended to be very pejorative and dismissive. It didn't work, and I think that's because of the strength of millions of votes and an alliance that was made that was unique, actually, politically.
Yeah, and so now the new fear campaign is that any change in the schedule at all, and there hasn't actually been many changes, right? I mean,
correct. Although it sounds like the 18th there might be, which I'm encouraged about.
But we don't know anything.
Is that something you want to talk about, or no?
No.
Okay.
No.
Robert, did you want to? No. Okay. But the only change so far has been that the COVID shot, which should never have been distributed to children in the first place, right? It's outrageous. Outrageous. It never should have been on the schedule. It's just like there's absolutely no defense of that under any circumstances.
Right, and it's still, in theory, recommended to medically fragile children who probably are the ones who may benefit the very least or be the most harmed.
But at the same time, what has happened is the way the public views the need or desire for that is shifting. And so that piper is piping, and even if things don't look like they're, for people who get frustrated thinking that the policy isn't moving fast enough, I'm always thinking, yeah, but on Main Street, it's moving.
Yeah, look, I get...
And I don't think
No, I am frustrated about the absence of utopia, too. But I will say, as somebody who's been attentive to political realities and stuff like that since I was about 20 years old, when I first started to care about these things, the last 6 months, I've seen the very first progress that I've actually ever experienced, and meaningful progress, substantial, institutionally based, genuine progress. I mean, and yet people are still complaining about it, but whatever. I mean, we need to understand how remarkable
some of that I think is, I mean, if we want to use this overused word, but some of that I think might be this trauma state that the collective nervous system stays in, which is just this idea that nothing good ever happens.
Well, that's what I pretty much has accepted.
I think that's what has happened, and the conversation about Clayton and Josh talking about who's an optimist, and that I was thinking, well, I'm sort of pathological optimist, but the time scale sometimes is longer than that's where I can sometimes start to despair. But when I was listening to Thomas say that the enchantment is, I'm going to get this a little bit wrong, but that enchantment is the antidote to pettiness, maybe is a way to put kind of what he was saying. Mm-hmm. That the other pole of that also is devastation, is another antidote in the moment to the sun and the black sun eclipsing everything else. And they are actually both places where you can draw tremendous clarity and strength. And so that's, I think, the gift of this shattering open that we've had, is to say, hey, we don't have to think that nothing good ever happens, because we've already seen good happen. This isn't what they wanted for us. This is not what they wanted for us.
No, it isn't.
We're here.
Now, let me ask a slightly different question. In the midst of these very exciting developments, in this evident progress, and this new emphasis on health and diet and all the things, and freedom, all this good news happens in the context of a global population that has been seriously damaged, intellectually, physically, spiritually, in every possible way. So, I mean, we have no choice but to work for progress. But I worry sometimes that the damage is much deeper than we know.
I think it's deep. I do believe that we have not yet had a COVID reckoning. I'm thrilled that, you're focused on this, but we cannot, it is right around the corner for the next one. But yeah, people were physically injured, people were psychologically injured, people were spiritually injured, by what happened in the last 5 years, there's no doubt. And worldwide, you're absolutely right. I mean, it was much harsher than in the United States in many places, including Canada, Israel, Australia, and a lot of other places.
Not to mention the injury from everything pre-COVID. I mean, we've been...
Well, not to mention, yeah. As Bobby Kennedy often points out, the fact that the mortality in the U.S. was so high is in part attributable to all the chronic disease that we'd already developed from our pharma lifestyle model.
Which is, I mean, I would say, this would be just a random unscientific number, but so I'll make it 99%. All the chronic disease that I see is iatrogenic in one way or another. It just all is. Some of it is iatrogenic because it's the result of...
For the people who don't know the word iatrogenic.
Doctor-induced. So, and sometimes this is from just low-level suppressions medically. Sometimes it's from actual malpractice. I think, there was something, I think it was Brett was saying, it's such a good point. Maybe it wasn't Brett, I made a lot of notes earlier, that one of the reasons why maybe it might have been Robert, the hostility to having a true patient-doctor relationship with nuance and subtlety is this lack of certainty goes both ways. And so if I am your homeopath and I'm sitting with you and I am taking your case and you're coming to me and you have chronic migraines, I can analyze that case. I can talk to you about how I'm making the decision I'm making, why I've selected the remedy I've selected, how I want you to take it, what I think your vital force might do in response and what I think that might look like. But I can be wrong at any point on that curve. And that's a scary place for both a professional and a patient to be. And that's where the personal responsibility comes in for the person on the patient side. Like, we've been indoctrinated into this system and also fed it because we've wanted it to give us answers. And we're being freed of that, which is amazing. But we have to go back and teach those people who are trying to serve us that we're taking responsibility.
Mary, I don't want the panel to end before asking you, how secure do you think these victories are? This goes back to my fundamental insecurity, really, my worries. Are you feeling good that something substantial and institutional is changing right now, and that we're making changes that are going to stick and make a difference?
Well, I don't have a crystal ball, Jeffrey. I wish I did. The courts move incredibly slowly. That's both their benefit and their, tragedy. And so I actually think that things that are going to happen through the courts are relatively stable. And I actually think that Bobby is not talking about, he is definitely looking at the long game. And I think we see that through the insistence on gold standard science, right? When you bring in real science, you say you have to have inert placebos, full stop. No controls, it's not science, it's marketing. So I'm it's going to be hard to walk that back. I'm not saying they're not going to try, but I'm hopeful. I mean, that's the best I can say. I'm hopeful. They're not afraid to do the clean sweep, and there's a lot of pushback. I've sat in some of these Senate hearings, and they're pretty brutal against Bobby. The week before last, pretty brutal. There are a lot of enemies out there that want him out, and that leaked memo that you all published, thankfully, made it very clear they want him out by the end of September.
And that memo was prophetic. I mean, the memo. I saw a headline yesterday somewhere at Washington Post or something.
It clearly,
it was that headline.
It's very well coordinated, and it's every single Democratic senator on that Senate Finance Committee had signed a letter that said he should resign, and the autism report is going to be very provocative in terms of trying to knock him out of the box, and we just saw a pretty horrific example this week of the lengths that some people are willing to go. So I'm hopeful, but I don't want to be naive. We're up against arguably. I actually do think that it's sort of going to what Tom Massey was saying. We're not just up against pharma. We're not just up against the media. We're not just up against the government. We're also up against a military, the military-industrial complex. Yeah. It is a phalanx that is really literally all of the most powerful institutions in the world.
Academia, big tech.
Yeah, I add them in, and it's globalized. It's highly globalized. Yeah. So I don't want to minimize already. I don't want to minimize what we're up against because we're up against a lot. But onward. It's the good fight.
All right. Well, thank you both, Sarah, Mary.
Thank you.
All right.